Hello and welcome. It's Friday and you're tuned into the best in paranormal talk radio. Another week gone, just like that. But we saved the best for last, Tim.
Yes, we did.
Well, at least that's the promise.
Yes.
That's the promise. If it goes horribly wrong, we only have one person to blame, Tim. It's our guest. Always our guest.
Oh, the
Never
guest,
us.
right.
We're professionals, Tim.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
come on.
No, we've got a good show for you tonight. We'll be back again next week with another whole slate of fantastic programming. But tonight, Tim, we're going to discuss, would you believe it, mysterious tales from people you'd least expect.
Really?
Yeah, that's the name of the book. That's the name of the topic. Joining us all the way via Australia to California to Colorado, Tim. Our guest now online with us, Karen Stollznow. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
It is a pleasure to talk to you. I'm sorry, should I refer to you as Dr. Karen Stollznow?
I don't want to. Please just call me Karen.
All right, doctor, whatever you say. You're the author of the bestseller God Bless America. Your other titles include Language, Myths, Mysteries, and Magic, Haunting America, and the novel Hit and Misses, and your forthcoming book, Would You Believe It? And you're also the co-host of Monster Talk with Blake Smith, a.k.a. Dr. Atlantis, an award-winning podcast that looks at the facts and legends about Bigfoot, sea monsters, ghosts, goblins, and the things under your bed. Tim, it's just filthy under his bed. A lot of old socks and dust bunnies. Yeah, you don't want to go there. You're a linguist who teaches at several universities, and you were a researcher at the University of California, Berkeley, where you worked on a project involving endangered writing systems for the Department of Linguists and Unicode. I would say all writing systems are endangered at this point because all everybody does is text and type now. Nobody handwrites anything, Doc.
Well, some are more endangered than others, that's for sure.
Well, it's cool. You were born in Sydney, have a PhD in linguistics from the University of New England, Australia. She lives currently, as we mentioned, in Denver, Colorado with her husband, Matthew Baxter, and their baby boy, Blade. Now, that's a cool name.
Thank you. Something different.
Yeah, Blade. All right. Well, let's get started. What you have your own podcast. You talk about monsters and all of these different beliefs. Before we get into the book too much, what kind of drew your attention to the strange and unusual?
Well, I've been involved in this for decades now. I did some work experience a long time ago with an organization called the Australian Skeptics, and they enlisted me to become a kind of Matahari, I guess, to go undercover with a number of different alternative practitioners and to investigate their practices and to go in and see them and see if they would diagnose me as suffering from any particular condition. So that really got me started in doing investigations and research into science, pseudoscience, the paranormal. So I've continued doing that for quite some time now.
Are you interested or fascinated by any one topic in particular, or do you just love the whole genre in itself?
I do love the whole genre, but I think I have a particular penchant for ghosts and for psychics. I think those are my particular interests.
Karen, can you just come to my house and read to me every night as I go to bed?
Sure, if you just want to tune into Monster Talk.
I'll do it. I'm going to now.
Talk to you every night.
I'll take that. Boy, what a calming, soothing word. And penchant, Tim, we always rip that word up. She just made it sound like a $20 word in Jeopardy. I like it. Right?
Thank you.
Very fancy. Let's talk a little bit about that. When you're looking at the idea of cryptids and creatures that still may evade us, do you put any real stock in that? Do you think that it's possible in 21st century, 2017, that there are still bipedal creatures that walk among us that we have no idea about or have no way of seeing or capturing on film?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me that question a little differently. I thought you were going to ask if new species and new creatures could be discovered. That sort of thing happens all the time. Right. Every year there are so many different creatures that are discovered by science that were hitherto unknown. So there is a possibility that there could be creatures out there that we're not aware of. That's exactly what happens. But as for a bipedal creature, it seems very unlikely, although there are many, many people who've had sightings who believe that they have encountered Bigfoot or some other similar ape man creature. So it is compelling stuff to hear about these people's sightings. And so we look at that and a lot more on Monster Talk, not only Bigfoot. There are plenty of other
sea monsters, ghosts,
out there.
goblins, all the fun stuff we mentioned earlier. But Bigfoot really is kind of a fascination for people. The idea that this mysterious creature could still walk among us and live in our world, coexist with us, and really kind of not interfere. I think that's part of the fascination. If they can do this, are they cloaking, or are they just that good at local camouflage? They know how to get in and out of these areas.
Yeah, well, there are lots of different theories about Bigfoot, that perhaps Bigfoot lives on some different kind of dimension, and the psychic Bigfoot theories. And lots of different stories and claims out there. But I think because if Bigfoot did exist, then these creatures would be very similar to humans. So I think that's why we have a particular fascination with them. They'd be so much like us.
I want to know your perspective on this. Do you stand on the side of believing, or are you firmly planted in the skeptical realm where you just don't believe this exists, but you're more fascinated by the legend and lore?
Well, I think that there is. I want to keep an open mind. I don't want to be a cynic. I am fascinated by people's stories. I'd like for a lot of these claims to be true. So rather than call myself a skeptic, even though I've certainly been positioned that way for a couple of decades now, I just like to call myself open-minded and say I'm interested in all of these claims and phenomena, and just open-minded to evidence, looking for evidence. Just trying to not be cynical about things.
Well, I think that's the important term. I think a lot of people mistake skeptic for cynic.
Yes, I think a lot of people equate skeptic and cynic as the same thing. And unfortunately, there are a lot of skeptics who are cynical.
Very cynical, right. And there's just nothing that will open them up to this possibility in their mindset. I think they're almost as dangerous as the true believers who believe everything. And I don't mean dangerous as in a, danger to us or society way, but I mean their way of thinking that there is no other possibility. This is it, cut and dry. They've made up their mind. That is what kind of bothers me about some of the quote unquote skeptics out there that are really more cynical. I think we all need to be skeptical of a situation. On Monday's show, we played a TED Talk, at least part of it, from a very interesting woman who had a paranormal experience with something she felt was very dark and demonic in nature. And it turned out to be, a carbon monoxide leak in her house. Oh,
yes. I've heard of those claims. And,
right.
That can really screw with your mind.
Right. And had she waited any longer, she probably would be dead. But she looked at all of the experiences she was having and looked at what the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning were, and it matched up. So the idea of being a skeptic and questioning is great. But it's anybody saying either way definitively this exists, I think, is where we start running into problems.
I totally agree. I think being a skeptic to a certain extent is a healthy approach, healthy attitude. But to go either way, to be extreme, to be militant, is being closed-minded.
All right. Let me ask you about this. I know we mentioned goblins, and I don't know if you just threw that in the press release as part of the topic, but we've talked on our show about things like the fairy folk and leprechauns and brownies and elementals, but especially around the Halloween season, people talk about ghouls and goblins. What exactly is a goblin? What is the definition of a goblin, and what are some of the stories surrounding it?
Goblins. I can't say that I've ever really. We've never done a show on goblins for Monster Talk, and so it's not necessarily my thing. I think it would be thrown into that same category along with fairies and other creatures like that. And I think a lot of people think of fairies as the kind of Disney fairy with wings and a wand and beautiful blonde hair, but fairies historically were evil creatures, were very nasty, and I think goblins are a different take on that.
I think if you were a fan of Tinkerbell, she fits right into the actual legend and lore of fairies. She was kind of nasty and spiteful and was willing to kill to get her own way.
Good point. But I think in general today, people think of fairies as just being these lovely creatures.
Bippity-boppity-boo characters, right, that are there to help us.
Innocent. And
I'm always fascinated because I'm terrified of the sea, of the ocean. I shouldn't be, but yeah, you should be. I think a healthy respect and fear is good to have of that because it's huge. It's generally unexplored, and we don't know everything that still exists out there. And what we do know, let's face it, is kind of horrific. You've got giant squid, you've got octopus, you've got killer sharks, killer whales, you've got dolphins with attitude, you've got all kinds of nasty stuff out there. That is one of the freakiest features to me of ocean life, and that they seem to be finding creepier and weirder things the deeper they start to explore. The idea and legends of sea serpents and creatures like that, I often wondered if these stories came up from the explorers and pirates in order to ward people off, to keep them from certain areas that they wanted kept pristine for themselves, either to plunder or to use as storage. What do you think about the whole idea of sea serpents?
Oh, well, I think, as you already said, there's so much about the ocean that is just uncharted, and we're still finding lots of different species that have been unfound until this point. So it's deep. It's just never ending. The ocean's pretty scary, and coming from Australia too. I mean, swimming at the beach in summer, you're always worried about sharks. You're always worried about blue-ringed octopus and other creatures, and more human things like hypodermic needles on the beach. But there's just so much we don't know about the ocean. That's why it can be a scary thing.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you moving away from Australia. It's a beautiful country. I had a chance to visit a few years ago, but everything can kill you in Australia. It is terrifying.
I think that about the States here, and I think it's just a matter of perspective, because I always have people asking me about snakes and spiders, and since I've been here, I've seen big cats just in the wild, and I've seen black widow spiders in my house, and I've seen more deathly creatures, I think, here than I ever have in Australia. They keep to themselves, snakes and spiders by and large, and but here you've got bears and big cats, and they scare the crap out of me.
But you have drop bears. You've got the violent, bloodthirsty drop bears in Australia. You can't fool me.
Probably not. I guess it's the equivalent of the tree alligator.
Yeah.
Here.
Oh, you've seen those too? Oh, God. See, yet another reason to stay out of Colorado, Tim. Tree alligators. I knew it.
Yeah.
Just a matter of time.
If you Google pictures of drop bears, they do look pretty frightening.
Yeah, they do.
But and koalas can be quite dangerous with the claws, and they can attack you. So you've got to be careful. But they won't quite drop onto you and attack.
I went to one of the animal preserves in Australia, which was amazing. I got to hand feed some wallabies and a kangaroo, and then nice. I go up to pose with their resident koala, and they're like, "Oh yeah, get in close. You want to get your face right up there so we get a really nice picture. But move slow, because if it gets irritated, it will attack." And I'm like, she tells me my face is now an inch away from this bear. And she goes, don't let their cuddly nature fool you. They can be very, very violent. Now, I don't know if she was just screwing with the American or if I should have been worried at that point, but
I think you've always got to be worried around any animals. They can act unpredictably, but certainly with koalas, if they have young, they're very protective, and with those big claws, you have to be careful. So I think she was warning you.
Yeah, see, I think I would probably be one of those people, Tim, that as it's mauling my face, I'd be going, ow, oh, look how cute you are. Ow, oh my God, you're so adorable. No. They are very cute. You've got great creatures in Australia. Yeah. All right, let's get started. And obviously, with all the books you've written, we're going to have to visit with you again, Karen, and talk about other things. But let's start talking about your new book. When is it going to be available?
Oh, it is available already. So you can get it in paperback. You can get it for Kindle as well. So in ebook form. So it's out there.
All right, great. So you heard it, folks. Go to Amazon.com. But the best way to do that is going through podcast1.com. Then click on the Killer Deals link. Click on Beyond the Darkness banner, and you'll find Amazon links for Australia, Canada, and the United States. Click on those links to order the book or anything you want to buy through Amazon.com, because remember, a small portion of every purchase goes to help fund our show, and the people selling stuff don't even feel it. It doesn't affect them at all. If it's $20 on Amazon, it's $20 on this deal, and they get their cut. Amazon gets their cut, and Beyond the Darkness gets a little money to keep us afloat and pay for all of our administrative costs. So go get the book right now. Would you believe it? Mysterious Tales from People You'd Least Expect. What was the genesis for this book for you?
I think it has been coming for a long time. My husband is a fellow paranormal investigator, Matthew Baxter, and he and I would just talk about the strange experiences that we've had and that other skeptics have had too. Over the years, I've done a lot of interviews, and I would always be asked, have you had anything strange happen to you? Have you had anything paranormal happen to you? And I used to say no. And that was, of course, very disappointing to whoever was interviewing me. And just over the years, talking about it more and thinking about it more, I came to realize that, I've had some strange experiences. I just interpreted them differently. I came up with a possible explanation, rationalized them, and then just forgot about them. So I think a lot of the paranormal is in the interpretation. And so then just over the years speaking with other skeptics and finding out that these are people who often seem to be, as we were discussing earlier, to be closed-minded or to be cynical, that no, in fact, a lot of skeptics have had strange things happen to them. Sometimes they can explain these stories and sometimes they can't. So I just started getting in contact with friends of mine. This is really was a fun book to do. I edited this volume, and it's just a collection of stories from friends of mine who are scientists, they're magicians, they're fellow authors, they're skeptics, and they have told me about their experiences, and I have shared them in this book, and it's just a really fun book to put together. Lots of stories about everything from UFOs to ghosts, superstitions and coincidences and alien abduction, Bigfoot encounters. It really covers a gamut of paranormal claims.
Well, let's start off with your own. What experiences did you have that to the outside world would appear to be mysterious and in the paranormal realm?
Well, a number of them, and the more I think about it, the more that come to me. But when I was a teenager, one night I was visiting a friend of mine who was in a hospital in Sydney. And as I was leaving the hospital, I decided, instead of just walking straight to my car, I've decided to take a walk through this local cemetery. It's called Gore Hill Cemetery. So I'm not sure if you had the chance to go and visit it when you were there, but it's a very famous cemetery because it is just so large. About 14,000 people have been buried there. But now there aren't any more burials. It's just closed, but it's surrounded by freeways and high-rise buildings. But it's just a very creepy cemetery because it's completely overgrown, and there's fungus on the tombstones. It looks like it's blood. It's just, everything is overgrown, very, very creepy. So I'm walking through there, and it's nighttime, and I trip over at some point because all of the paths have roots growing through them. So I trip over and I look up, and I was absolutely positive that I saw a glowing white angel, and that she was pointing at me, and that she was staring at. So she was pointing at the skies, and she was staring at me, and she had this menacing expression. So it really scared the crap out of me, and it made me immediately think, this is a bad omen. Maybe something bad is going to happen to my friend in hospital, or maybe this is some kind of warning for me that something's about to happen to me. And as I say in the book, my night vision has never been terribly good. So I kind of closed my eyes, rubbed them, and looked back again. And all I saw was a statue. And it was a marble statue of an angel. But the strange thing is, she wasn't looking at me. She was looking kind of downcast. And her finger wasn't pointing to the sky. She had her hands clasped in prayer. So it just seemed to me, with the way the street lights were, that possibly this was an optical illusion. That's the way that I rationalized it anyway. But I was pretty convinced initially that I'd seen an angel, had some kind of angel visitation. So that's just one of several other things that have happened to me.
What brings you comfort more, Karen, that you might have had an angelic encounter, or that you most likely did not have an angelic encounter?
Well, I think the idea that I've had a paranormal experience kind of tickles my fancy, makes me think, hey, I'm like a lot of other people, that I've had this weird experience. But on the other hand, it is nice and comforting to me to be able to come up with some kind of explanation for it, that a natural explanation. So you've got those two possibilities, a supernatural explanation or a natural explanation.
All right, so that was one of the moments you had. Now, your friend that was in hospital, did anything happen?
No, nothing happened to him. He got out pretty quickly, and so it wasn't a bad omen. It wasn't a sign of any kind, seemingly. So yeah, everything was fine in the end. But at the time, and I wasn't on drugs, I wasn't drinking or anything like that, but I, to this day, still swear that I saw this glowing white angel initially.
All right, give me another one of your possible paranormal experiences.
Okay, well, another one is my actual story in the book, and so it's kind of secondhand. It's my grandmother's story, not mine. And she was shopping in Kmart, so it sounds pretty practical and everyday. She was shopping in Kmart on a Monday morning. I don't know what she was shopping for, but she was just wandering around the store, and you know what Kmart's like. You've got the bright lights, neon lights, fluorescent lights, and music playing loudly, people everywhere. It's pretty mundane, pretty ordinary. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like the lights dimmed and the people disappeared and the music stopped. And then she could hear a woman's voice singing. And she recognized the song. It was an Irish song that I don't expect you guys to necessarily know, called The Rose of Tralee. So it's an old Irish folk song. And her father had used to sing that to her when she was a little girl. So she immediately thought of her father. And then suddenly he appeared in Kmart, of all places. But this was completely impossible because he'd been buried the week before. So this really scared her. And at the same time, he looked a lot younger. He looked a lot healthier. And he just said, "Don't worry, Ruby, I'm fine." And then he just disappeared. Then the lights came back on in the Kmart and the music was playing again and people were in there and it just seemed like everything went back to normal.
And then, of course, over the loudspeaker, you heard the famous, "Attention, Kmart shoppers. In aisle 14, we have paranormal experiences. Please make your way to aisle 14.
That's probably how it happened, yeah.
So that's cool. So she was almost like in a pocket in between time.
I have no idea exactly what she experienced. And she was a very sensible woman, very strict, no nonsense. She just wasn't prone to fantasy or anything like that. So she continued to tell that story until she died. And so to me, it's an incredible story.
Did it end up bringing her comfort? I know at first she was frightened by the moment, but in hindsight, was it something that she felt better about knowing that her father was still with her?
Absolutely. Just the more that she thought about the situation, she thought this was him coming to her to see her one last time and that he was bringing her this assurance, this comfort that he was okay. And the fact that he looked younger and that he looked healthy was a great comfort to her. So I think she really held on to that for the rest of her life. And she just loved to tell that story and she truly believed it happened. And I believe her that she experienced something because she was, as I said, a very honest woman, and I have no reason to not believe her.
All right. Now, one thing that intrigued me about this, I have yet to get the book, but I'm looking forward to reading it myself. You have a foreword by James Randi, the amazing Randi.
Which would be pretty unexpected for a lot of people for a book like this.
Exactly. How did you get him on board for a book that's going to kind of look at mysterious tales and possible paranormal experiences?
Well, he had a very nice story to tell, and so I won't give that story away. I'll let readers get into that. But it had a nice moral to it that we should really be open-minded, that we should refrain from being skeptical, from being too skeptical, hyper-skeptical is how he calls it.
Uh-oh.
And we should not be cynical either. And so I know a lot of people listening to the show will think, oh, James Randi is Mr. Cynic,
right.
But it was very, very nice to have him participate in this and to show that he's trying to be open-minded. And so it's really more of a kind of moral, more of a lesson. He doesn't have a paranormal experience as such.
All right. Before we go to the break, why don't you explain to us one of your favorite stories from the book? And then we'll have to take a break. We'll come back and continue with more from her book. Would you believe it? Mysterious Tales from People You'd Least Expect.
I really do love all of the stories because they just bring something unique in their telling. Each one of them is different. But I think one of my favorites is my husband's, if I can say that, so Matthew Baxter. And he writes about his experiences with a particular hotel that is in Evergreen in Colorado, the Brook Forest Inn. And he was there doing an investigation one night with his business partner, Brian Bonner. And so they turned up and the cleaner or the keeper of the hotel, he was very excited about just being able to take off and have a few drinks. So he threw them the keys and he took off and they set up all of their equipment. This was in the middle of a blizzard too, so the place was nice and quiet. And so they set up all of their equipment and at one point they suddenly heard the front door fling open and there were just a mass of people who came through. And they were really irritated. They thought, oh, great, this caretaker has just brought home the bar. So he's gone to the bar for a little while, had a few drinks, and then just brought everyone back because there was a bar in this hotel as well. And so they were very irritated, and they started going down the stairs to tell him off and to tell him that he needs to get rid of these people, get them out of there. And as they start going down the stairs, the noise just completely stopped. And they'd been hearing the sounds of a party. It sounded like people tinkling glasses and kicking their shoes and getting rid of the snow from their shoes. And so they were totally hearing a group of people who were partying in there. But as they came down the stairs, there was nothing. So they went back upstairs again, and they were speaking to other members of their team. And they said, what happened? We were hearing this party, and then when you guys were coming back up, the sound completely stopped. So it seemed like they were continuing to hear the sounds even though the guys were downstairs and they couldn't see anything there. So that's very similar to another experience I've had too, of being on a site of an allegedly haunted place and hearing the sounds of some kind of phantom party. I think that's a common experience that people have.
Okay, if we're going to look at the science of what's going on, the possibilities of what could cause a phenomenon like that isn't heard just by one, but by many people, what would you and your husband think might be a logical explanation for that experience?
Well, it's so difficult because we like to recreate any phenomena. So if we like to look at individual claims and to try and recreate them somehow to see, can these have a natural, normal explanation instead of a supernatural or paranormal one? But with a case like this, even though they continued to go downstairs, they looked around and they couldn't find anything. That's a really difficult thing to be able to replicate. So it's really a matter of, well, let's posit some possible explanations without ever knowing if they could be accurate or not. So one of our theories is that it was some kind of, similar to an optical illusion, but an auditory illusion. Perhaps even though this was in the middle of a blizzard and it was just dead quiet, maybe there was a snowplow outside, or maybe there was something else that was going on outside that created a sound that was similar to that of a party going on. But yeah, there was absolutely nothing taking place there, and it's a very curious experience.
You're a linguist, so you understand how language works, what goes on. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
When we speak, walk me through the science of how we hear the words that come from my mouth and go across the desk here to Tim. How does that work? What does the body do to understand it? Where does the sound go, and how does that work? Can you give me like a basic fundamental look at that?
Linguistics is a really broad area of science. I mean, it is the language is basically studying the science of language. And my area is in semantics, so I look at meanings of words, and there are just so many different branches. So that's more kind of phonology, phonetics. So that's not really my area.
Well, the idea is, right, that when we speak, we're creating a vibration. And it's going into the head. It's bouncing off of the eardrum, causing that. And that the further away you are from something, the longer it'll take for that sound to travel. That's why you can watch a baseball game. You see him swing and the ball connect. And a few seconds later, you hear the crack of the bat against the ball, even though it's already gone, depending on the distance from that original sound.
Right.
The reason I bring that up was growing up, I grew up in Medina, Illinois.
Okay.
And it was right down the street from the Medina Golf Course, this huge PGA champion golf course. All right. Mm-hmm. And one of the strange phenomena that affected many of us in our homes was the sounds of parties that would take place.
Right.
And especially at night. And this was, the 60s, 70s. There wasn't air conditioning in everybody's house. Most people were fan sleepers. So you've got that fan on, creating that template of white noise.
Right.
And we would hear this, and you'd be laying there, and it would almost sound like a TV kind of in the distance, or a radio on, and you'd turn off your fan, and the sound would disappear, and you turn it back on, and within moments again, as the fan's going, you could hear laughter, glasses clinking, talk, music, but it was just far enough outside the auditory range that you could hear it, but it was muddied. You couldn't understand what was being said. So I always thought, wow, we grew up in, everybody's always hearing about the ancient Indian burial grounds and that you've upset the Native American grounds, and that's why these horrific hauntings are taking place. And I thought the Native Americans from Medina, Illinois must have been the biggest party group ever, because for blocks, that's all we would hear at night were these sounds of parties in our houses. And it wasn't until I was a little bit older and as an adult, I realized I'm facing our property is facing one of the biggest ballrooms in the area, where there is a big celebration, party, anniversaries, weddings. And I think what might have been going on, looking at it from a skeptical viewpoint, is that sound continues. But the further away you are from it, it gets loopier and it's harder to hear. But when you have the template, the white noise of the fan, that sound is coming and kind of striking the back of your fan, and the from the fan is kind of giving it an audible template to be replayed, but just not focused enough to give you concise sounds. And
Right.
that made more sense to me than anything we just had party ghosts that lived in all of our houses and would rage parties in our basements. I think it had much more.
Even though that's a fun idea.
I think that there's much more to the idea that, especially when it's fan related or you've got white noise on in the background which is the only way I can sleep as an adult. I often wonder if we're creating that false eardrum with the back of our fan, picking up sounds and then rebroadcasting it kind of in that white noise template to us.
Well, I think one of the skeptical explanations for something like that, and for some of the experiences I've had too, there's another story that I talk about in the book where I'm hearing a phantom party as well. So skeptics would normally explain this sort of thing as being pareidolia. I'm not sure if you've heard of that term before.
Sure.
There are other similar terms like apophenia. So this is an audio pareidolia, a form of that, which is where you hear specific sounds amongst random stimuli. So, for example, if you're having a shower and you think that you're hearing your phone ring, it's that you're hearing this random noise in the shower of the water falling, but then you can hear other sounds within that. So that's a common explanation that skeptics have for a lot of things like EVPs and just hearing ghostly sounds. And as you say, too, these could have been the sounds coming from that ballroom, because I had an experience of hearing party sounds at a place called the Quarantine Station, which was in Sydney.
I've been there. I've been there. I did an investigation there a few years ago.
Oh, how fantastic. Yeah, I've been there so many times that I know more of the stories than the tour guides do. And so I was there with a group of friends, and we were outside this room where historically a lot of parties had taken place, and we heard the sounds of a party. We could hear a woman laughing, and we could hear champagne glasses tinkling, and just people chatting. And so we thought, oh, there's a party in here. So we were just kids at the time, and we decided to open the door and peer in, see what was going on. And when we did so, there was nothing in there. The room was empty. It was dark. Nothing was going on at all. So we started looking around the grounds to see if there was a party going on somewhere else, because nowadays this old Quarantine Station is just it's a convention center and a hotel. And so we thought maybe there's a party going on somewhere else. So we looked around the grounds and we couldn't find anything at all. And a bit later on, we heard the party sounds again, something similar, not the same thing, but we heard sounds of some kind of party taking place. And it seemed as though, so this is right on a headland area on the peninsula, and you can see Sydney from there. So we came to the conclusion that it was probably the sounds of a party that was taking place on the mainland, and those sounds were coming through. I mean, you've got ferries around there, two people partying on boats. So that was our theory anyway. But again, that's a really difficult thing to kind of recreate. Right.
And people don't realize that in the silence of night, when you don't have necessarily all of the other sounds distracting you, you don't have planes, people mowing their lawn, dogs barking, children playing, how much further sound will travel. And that reminds me of the story in Chicago. There was a circus train that had a horrific accident. Many of the animals were killed. And there are parts of the train tracks when you go out there at night, you can hear the ghostly sounds of lions roaring, elephants trumpeting, horses. It is really a bizarre effect. And if you're in the mindset of the paranormal, it is really kind of exciting and chilling. What you also don't realize is that you're only a few miles away from Lincoln Park Zoo. And at night, the animals are making their natural noises. And in that night air, that cool, crisp night air without all the rest of the sound effects out there to distract you, that sound can carry. And if you watch any kind of specials on animals, they'll tell you a lion's roar sometimes can be heard up to 5 miles from its initiation point. And the same with that blast from an elephant's trumpet. So for years, people believed that they were hearing the ghostly sounds of this train wreck, when in fact that if you just kind of pointed in the direction, and they started doing it with those sound cones, they realized that they were just picking up the Lincoln Park Zoo after effect. So it's kind of a fun little story.
Absolutely. And have you ever been to the San Antonio Railroad tracks? I'm sure you're aware of the stories.
Right. I'm aware of it. Yep.
Yeah, so my husband and I were there a number of years ago, and the basic story is that there was an accident with a bus the train that hit a bus, and that there were a number of kids who were killed in that accident. Mm-hmm. And so we were there years ago, and we were hearing kids scream, and it just scared the crap out of us. And we were looking around and trying to find the source for this. We just kept hearing kids screaming and crying, and eventually we saw that there was a park nearby, and there were kids playing soccer, and so that's where the sounds were coming from. But it was certainly very creepy to experience that.
Yeah, you can that weird after effect of sound and how sound works and travels. You always have to be very cautious with that. Although I love EVP when we're investigating, because to me that's the most interactive kind of investigation. You have to be the most skeptical of that, because there are so many things that can cause auditory hallucinations, pareidolia, mm-hmm. and after effect. You know, if you start getting direct conversation, which I've heard, that to me is much more effective and frightening. We need to take a break, and there's a knock coming from deep inside the Darkhive. So turn down the lights, turn up the sound. It's time for a true tale from the Theater of the Mind. Theater of the Mind. The following story was sent in to us by a listener wishing to remain anonymous because of his position as a doctor. I'm definitely a skeptic, but one experience I had house sitting for my aunt and uncle definitely raised some questions for me. They were going out of town for a weekend and asked if I would keep an eye on the house and take care of their dogs while they were away. I was staying with my grandparents for the summer, as I usually did, and being a 16-year-old with a brand new driver's license, I jumped at the chance for a few days of freedom with a house to myself during my summer vacation. I packed up my PlayStation, rented some games and movies, stocked up on some snacks, and headed over to their house. The first night was uneventful, but I remember feeling slightly uneasy being in this house. Nothing out of the ordinary was going on. I just attributed the uneasiness to being in the house alone for the first time without my aunt and uncle there. Around 1 a.m., I decided to go to bed and let the dogs out in the backyard to relieve themselves before bed. After they were done, I made sure everything was locked, doing the deadbolt and the chain locks on the doors. I woke up the next morning, put some coffee on, and got the dogs up to let them out. The uneasiness still remained. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, even though I knew no one else was around. After breakfast, I decided I was going to go for a bike ride and meet up with some friends. I put the dogs in their crates, locked up, and headed out. I was gone for maybe 4 hours until mid-afternoon when I decided to head back to the house. When I walked in, the dogs were freaking the hell out. Not your normal, happy to see you, let me out of this crate excitement, but full-blown panic, shaking, foaming at the mouth, howling, the works. These dogs are normally very calm and are perfectly content to spend most of the day in their crates sleeping. They go in and out on their own for naps, so this was really out of the ordinary. I opened the doors to their crates, but neither of them wanted to come out. Being a little freaked out myself at this point, I decided to check the house to make sure nothing had happened. All the windows were fine, everything was still locked, and the house was completely empty. At this point, I should mention how the house is laid out a bit. It's an old house, late 1800s, and prior to my aunt and uncle moving in, it was divided up as a duplex. The upstairs was a separate apartment. They mentioned that an older woman had rented the upstairs, while the previous owners lived downstairs. My aunt and uncle didn't rent the upstairs, but didn't really do anything to convert the house back into a single-family dwelling. My uncle used the upstairs apartment as his home office, with several computers and a couple of modems, early 2000s dial-up. And most of the time, the door to the upstairs, in the enclosed porch off the kitchen, just stayed closed and locked. There really wasn't any reason to go up there. I decided, in an abundance of caution, since the dogs were so freaked out, that I should check the whole house. I unlocked the door to the upstairs, and I went up to check. I noticed that one of the computers was on. This was odd, as my uncle had said in his note that he'd shut off everything upstairs and unplugged the surge protectors. Maybe he meant to do so, but got into a rush to get out the front door and maybe forgot. No big deal. We were expecting storms later, so I shut down the computer, unplugged everything, and went back downstairs, locking the door behind me. By this point, the dogs had calmed down and had taken their usual spots on the couch, where I joined them to play some PlayStation. After dinner, around 8 p.m. at this point, the dogs and I were still on the couch, watching movies, and just chilling out. All of a sudden, one of the dogs stands up on the couch, with all of his fur on his back standing on end, and begins growling towards the direction of the door to the stairs. He continued this for the next 15 minutes, and nothing I did would distract him from whatever he was sensing. He eventually calmed down and laid down beside me again. A few hours later, around 11 p.m., he started again, and the other dog joined in this time too. That's when I began to hear creaking coming from upstairs, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. It didn't sound like footsteps, just like someone rocking back and forth on the loose board. Properly freaked out now, I went to investigate. This time, I noticed that the door to the upstairs was now unlocked. I had locked it when I went up there earlier. Oh, shit. Someone might be in the house. I took a few steps back into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. You know, like a horror movie cliche. I checked the porch door to the backyard, which would be where someone would come in to get up to those upstairs apartments. It was still locked. Okay, weird. The creaking upstairs was still happening. I opened the door to the stairs and it immediately stopped. I turned the lights on and went upstairs. Nothing. I was freaking out over nothing. It was probably just the house settling or something. It was, after all, a very old house. These things creak and groan all the time. A little embarrassed with myself for getting so freaked out, I went back downstairs again, locking the door behind me. I decided to get some sleep, popped in another movie, curled up on the couch, and passed out for the night. I was woken up a few hours later, around 2 a.m., to the dogs again in full-blown panic mode. This time, I could hear the creaking again. And then something else happened. I heard a dial tone. I heard a modem upstairs dial some numbers. I heard it try to connect. What the frig? Was I still asleep? No, I was definitely awake. I again grabbed the knife, went to the upstairs door. Again, it was locked. I opened the door, and the noise again immediately cut off. I went upstairs to check. Again, nothing. And everything was still off and unplugged just as I had left it. I went back downstairs, locked everything up, and went to try and calm the dogs down. About 10 minutes later, I heard the modem start up again. It would dial, try to connect, stop, then dial again, and again, and again. The creaking was back too, and this time, it did sound like someone was walking around up there, even though I knew I was alone, and had checked every conceivable place in the house for an intruder to hide. I put up with this for another half hour or so, and it didn't let up. The dogs wouldn't calm down either. Eventually, I had enough. I grabbed the dogs, loaded them in my car, locked up, and got the hell out of there. I went back to my grandparents' place and stayed there for the rest of the night with the dogs. The next morning, my grandparents were surprised to see me there and asked what had happened. I relayed the previous night's events to them, feeling like a crazy person for what I had experienced. Strangely, they didn't seem surprised at all. Then, they told me that this wasn't the first time something strange had happened there, and that my aunt and uncle had all kinds of stories about the place. For example, my little cousin frequently woke up screaming that a shadow man was looking at him in his bed, or my uncle going upstairs to work on his computers one day and discovering the gas stove turned on, but unlit, leaking gas into the house, and all kinds of things misplaced or doors left open and unlocked. I still don't think I believe in the paranormal and consider myself an agnostic atheist, but I still can't find a reasonable explanation for what I experienced that weekend. It was all too weird.
So far in 2017, Forbes and Podcast One have already launched 3 highly acclaimed shows. The Interview with Steve Bertoni features the business world's most interesting names, like Adam Carolla, Twitter founder Sean Rad, and Hollywood's own Jessica Alba.
So I spent a lot of my childhood in hospital bed.
Under 30 with Steve Goldblum talks to the movers and shakers, like Nation Builder CEO Jim Gilliam and NFL big game winner Martellus Bennett.
Guys are afraid to be themselves because of their marketing deals.
And The List with Art of Charm's Jordan Harbinger.
We'll get behind-the-scenes insight and information that doesn't make the print cut.
Next up, Sports Money with Mike Ozanian talking to team owners, athletes, and industry leaders about the enterprise and money behind supreme athletic competition. Forbes on Podcast One. Not just entertaining, informative. Subscribe now at iTunes, and don't forget to rate, review, and share.
Beyond the Darkness.
And we're back here on Beyond the Darkness, your home for the best in paranormal talk radio, 5 nights a week, Monday through Friday. You can tune in here at podcast1.com and check out all of the great topics. If you missed any of them this week, we had, of course, Monday, we started off with supernatural news, and we had so much to cover, we didn't even get to Parashare.
Yeah, I know. I feel bad about that, too.
Well, next Monday, we'll do just a couple supernatural news bits, and then we'll try to fill it up with some of the Parashare. No need to feel bad. I thought it was fun. We did some movie reviews, talked about Paisley Park and some of the new supernatural news that took place. But we'll do that on Monday. We'll do a smaller segment of supernatural news and more for you in Parashare. Tuesday, though, we had the Beast of Boggy Creek, the search for Southern Sasquatch, y'all.
Yeah.
Whoop, y'all.
Whoop, y'all.
Wednesday, the Great Pyramid Hoax. Thursday, we had from Ghost Brothers, we had Daylin was with us, Daylin Spratt. And again, that begins airing again tonight. That's the new season kicking off. So you make sure you want to check that out. And again, today, Friday, with our guest talking about her book, Would You Believe It? Mysterious Tales from People You'd Least Expect. Speaking of mysterious tales, Tim.
Yeah.
I saw your bucket come rolling in today.
Okay.
And it's looking rough, my friend. I'm not going to lie to you. I think we're getting very close to putting a bullet in it and burying old Yeller out in the backyard. Your truck is on its last legs.
Yeah.
There's no need to have fear anymore, Tim.
That's what I understand.
You don't have to be afraid of making that next purchase.
Well, I tell you, Dave, I have actually downloaded the TrueCar app onto my iPhone.
Have you?
I have.
Okay. And are you finding what I'm finding? It's much easier to negotiate. And I don't mean prices, but I mean just to negotiate through this, this horrific web of trying to understand cars. You're much more car adept than I am. I couldn't, I know where to put the gas. I know where to put the keys. And that's about the extent of it, My expertise was always in the backseat, if you know what I mean. But the rest of the car is just completely off limits to me. I don't have a clue. And buying cars has always been a nightmare for me. If I don't have you or my dad or my oldest son with, I always end up buying some junk bucket that dies on me in 6 months.
No, the nice thing about TrueCar is it's got so much information there. You can compare against other vehicles and other makes and truly get the price that you're looking for. You look at. I'll give you an example. Okay, I like SUVs. All right, and my current SUV is a Ford Explorer. I tend to be partial towards Explorers. So I've been looking at Explorers on TrueCar. And you can really get rooked on a used Explorer. And I've been looking at used. Obviously, I'm not in the market for a new Explorer, but I'm in the market for a used Explorer. And if you're looking at older models, you can get a decent Explorer for a decent price, or you can really get raked over the coals and pay too much. And with TrueCar, I'm looking through the app and I'm seeing that amongst all the TrueCar approved dealers, you're really getting a good price and you're really getting detailed information behind each vehicle.
Right. And the actual price people are paying for these vehicles, not the pumped up prices that you're going to see online and other locations. And what's great is their stats. They have 3 million cars that have already been sold. They have over 13,000 dealers to work with and over 700,000 pre-owned vehicles. So if you're like Tim and I, you're on a budget, you're looking for a way to find a good, reliable car, something that's going to last. I got my son's going to be 15. He's going to start in, God, Tim, I would rather face a room full of demons and poltergeist than to worry about another kid becoming a driver. And I've got one knocking on the door this year, and he wants to start looking at cars. 700,000 pre-owned vehicles. And this is the best part to me. The average savings on these, over $3,000 off of the manufacturer's suggested retail price.
Yeah.
That's what you're able to find. So you can check out TrueCar for yourself. So whether you're looking to buy a new or used car, TrueCar gets you real pricing on actual inventory. And this isn't pricing offered by TrueCar, but pricing from an actual dealer.
Right.
And not just any dealer, but a TrueCar certified dealer. So it's the way they do it, it's this kind of carefully curated network of dealers committed to full transparency. We hear that bandied about a lot in the news.
Right.
But in this case, you don't have to worry. You're getting real transparency when it comes to this and offering you a competitive market price. So using TrueCar, you can find the car you want, which you're looking for.
Yep.
You're going to be able to find and show what other people in your area paid for that same car you're looking for. And make sure that the price is fair.
Right.
Because you and I have both been rooked. We found out, I got a really good deal on my Ford Explorer, which is just a year older than yours, or a year younger than yours, I should say.
Yep.
And I saved thousands of dollars off of what you paid for it.
You know what? I bought mine from a private dealer, and it was probably the worst mistake I ever made. I've had it less than a year, and it is ready. It's like you said, it's ready to go bite a bullet in the backyard somewhere.
Right.
And I'm glad now that I'm looking at the TrueCar app and I'm seeing what other people have paid, and I'm in a secure network of authorized dealers that I feel secure about.
Right. You work directly with TrueCar certified dealers when you do this.
Right.
And TrueCar users are more likely to enjoy a faster buying process too.
Right.
It's not this long, drawn out thing that you have to deal with. So once you register, you'll see a real price on actual inventory. This, again, very competitive pricing offered to you by TrueCar certified dealers for an actual vehicle on their lot, not some kind of shell game that a lot of these dealers have played.
Mm-hmm.
It's pricing you'll see before you go to the dealership, so you feel very confident. And this takes all of the worry out of it. So whether you're 16 or 116, if you're intimidated by buying cars, which a lot of people are, TrueCar takes a lot of that out of there for you. And TrueCar shows their customers all their available incentives before you even arrive at the dealership. So again, check it out. Visit TrueCar to enjoy a more confident car buying experience. Take it from your pals Dave and Tim, because this is the way I'm going to be doing it going forward, and it's making my life so much easier. I feel like I'm less the moron as it comes to cars now, so I can confidently make that next purchase with my son. Coming up way too soon. We've already started searching these together and looking at cars, and he's even surprised at the information he's getting on these different vehicles that he had preconceived notions on.
Yeah.
He's getting the real deal and understands just how pricey some cars are and how much more economical and affordable some of the others are.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're gonna be doing on. So again, try the TrueCar Advantage and work with them. You guys will be thankful that you did. We've got a lot to cover again tonight. Our guest is Karen Stollznow, Dr. Karen, Tim. Don't be too intimidated by that.
I am.
Her book, Would You Believe It? Mysterious Tales from People You'd Least Expect. Now, I know one of the stories you cover is about this stone carving that vanishes and reappears mysteriously. Tell me a little bit about this story and who is dealing with this.
Okay, well, this comes from another doctor and also another Aussie. Her name's Lynn Kelly, and she's an Australian writer and a researcher and a science teacher as well. And you should have her on this show if you can, because she's written a fantastic book called The Memory Code, which is the traditional Aboriginal memory technique that unlocks the secrets of Stonehenge, Easter Island, and ancient monuments the world over. So she has a very interesting theory about how the ancients would, the memory aids that they would use to record their history. And so she came to the States back in about 2009. She wanted to do some research into this theory. And she went to New Mexico, and apparently there's a park there called the Petroglyph National Monument. Mm-hmm. And they've got, so it's on the outskirts of Albuquerque, and they have thousands of images which are carved onto the soft volcanic rock there. And so they were carved by ancestral people and early Spanish settlers. So she was really keen to see these petroglyphs and to see if they matched this pattern that she expected that they would for her theory. So she went to this place, and she spoke with the park ranger there, who said that she needed to watch out for rattlesnakes, which is obvious good advice there. But
always good advice. Watch out for rattlesnakes.
Watch out for rattlesnakes, yeah. But she also explained that some of the petroglyphs will only appear if you want to see them. So she thought, being a skeptic, she kind of poo-pooed it a bit and thought that's silly, but there must be some kind of rational explanation for it. So she just nodded politely and then went to check out these petroglyphs. And so she went to one of the ones which was famous for apparently disappearing. And she said she looked at this particular rock and there was absolutely no spiral there. There was nothing at all. So she took lots of photographs from different angles and just couldn't see anything at all. So then she started just wandering around the park and looking at other things. And it was about maybe half an hour later that she came back and she went to that same petroglyph, and there was a spiral. So there was absolutely nothing there before. And the second time that she came around, it was there, that it was really clear. And she took some photographs of it and just tried to take shots from different angles to see if she could kind of mimic the spirals disappearing. And she just couldn't. And to this day, she has no explanation for that experience.
That is really cool.
It's really weird.
Wow. So if you go there, that's kind of an interesting aspect of this whole phenomena, right? If you go in kind of with a preconceived notion or wanting to see things, isn't that kind of the whole idea of the paranormal? They say the more you're open to it, the more you'll experience it. So maybe some of this stuff is going on, like Bigfoot, like other beings like this. Maybe they're there all the time, but we've kind of shielded ourselves from it. And again, I'm going off on the paranormal end of it here as opposed to the skeptical aspect, but it does make you wonder if you start to open your eyes to this and you take the blue pill, will you start seeing the world around you more?
Yeah, I think it is a lot about perception and the way that you interpret the experiences that happen to you. And but it's interesting to me that she's a skeptic and she didn't expect to see anything, and she had that experience. All
right, very cool. Now, we have a mutual friend, Aidan Sinclair, who is an illusionist, paranormal illusionist, and magician, works out at the Stanley Hotel. And you said he has a few stories in the book to share as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, we combined two stories for his chapter. And at first he talks about Manresa Castle, which is in Port Townsend, Washington. Mm-hmm. And so he turned up really late to check in one night, and he went upstairs and just threw a couple of personal items onto the TV nightstand and crawled into bed. And then he awoke the next morning and he went and he had breakfast. But when he returned to his room, he found that the objects he'd thrown on the nightstand had been moved and they'd been very neatly lined up. So he had, I think, some coins and some kind of shirt studs, which he'd literally tossed onto this nightstand. And yet the next morning they were lined up and he hadn't had a cleaner or a maid. No one had come through and done anything. So he's taken a picture of this. And that's included in the book. And so it reminded him a great deal of a lot of the stories you hear about the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park in Colorado, about people's personal possessions being moved and their clothing being mysteriously packed and unpacked. And he has another friend who had a similar experience happen to him too. So that was a really weird one. But his second experience is at the Stanley Hotel. So he is the resident illusionist there. If you go, he has a fantastic theatrical seance that he performs for people. And so it's done in the style of the spiritual seances that were conducted in the Victorian and Edwardian era. Mm-hmm. And so one night, I shouldn't spoil the whole story, but suffice to say one night they were having some strange problems with the lighting there. And even though the building's pretty old, everything, all the electrical, the lighting and everything has been modernized, and yet they were having some weird experiences with lights flashing on and off. And there was a lady in the audience who just kept looking at the lights and looking at the piano that he was standing beside. This is in the music room, which is allegedly one of the haunted rooms there. And so this lady just throughout this entire seance kept looking at the piano and looking back at Aidan, and she just seemed to be trembling and was very scared. And he just continued with his show, and then afterwards he went up and spoke with her and said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Were you fiddling with the lights? Were you doing anything with the lights? Did you make that happen? Was that part of your performance?" And he said, no, this doesn't normally happen, but I can assure you there's nothing paranormal going on and it wasn't a part of my act. And then she said, "Well, what about the woman?" And he said, "What do you mean, the woman?" So this lady had been seeing a woman standing beside the piano the entire time that no one else could see. So she wondered and Aidan wondered if it might have been Flora Stanley, who was the wife of the owner of the hotel, the original owner. So no one else could see this woman. She could see her, and she was saying that she enjoyed Aidan's show, and she was apparently behind these lights flashing on and off. So Aidan just found that made him question his version of reality, and he had a similar experience about a year later, where he bought some roses for Flora Stanley and placed them on the piano and said, "If you're here, thank you." And the lights mysteriously turned on and off a couple of times, even though everything was switched off.
That's really cool. When we did our first event out at the Stanley in November of 2006, I thought was so funny. They just wrapped up filming the live Ghost Hunters episode there with Jason and Grant. And literally we showed up the day afterwards and we did a live event there with Jason and Grant from Ghost Hunters and Steve and Brian and a couple of the other team members. And the night auditor for the hotel approached me as the event coordinator, and he's like, this is funny. I've been working here forever, all these paranormal stories. I've never had an experience, and I'm the guy here working by myself late at night. He goes, nothing ever happens here. Well, a couple days later, after our event is in full swing and we've been ghost hunting and doing all these fun things and talks, he said, he grabs me in the lobby of the morning. He goes, "Come here." And I go, "What?" And he goes, holy crap. I go, what happened? He goes, so last night, everybody finally settles down about 3:00 in the morning. And he goes, and boy, your people can drink, Dave. I'll tell you that. Your people are definite drinkers and have a lot of fun. He goes, so I spent most of the night shooing people out of the music room, where I kept finding them making out or playing on the piano in there. He goes, so I kept throwing people out of that room. And he goes, and finally, after I got everybody settled, I start hearing the piano. Somebody's hammering away at the keys. So I grab my light and I start heading in there, getting ready to throw people out. The piano's going till I walk through the threshold of the room. The piano stops. He goes, so I flip the switch. I'm like, all right, come on. You got to get out of here. You're not supposed to play the piano. He said, I turn on the lights. There's nobody in the room. And he said, Dave, I've been here for years. There has never been anything. I don't know what you guys got going now, but make it leave when you leave. And he laughed. But yeah, so here's the night auditor finally had his experience at one of our events, and he totally expected to find a couple of people in there horsing around again and found an empty room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, I want to kind of save one of the stories for last year, but let's talk about Haley Stevens. This is an interesting poltergeist story that you have in the book.
Yes, she used to work in a bakery, and this was in a little town called Trowbridge, I'm not too sure, in England. So she's a skeptical paranormal investigator hailing from the UK. And so she worked in this shopping centre in this bakery, and one day something seemed to untie the apron that she was wearing, and she thought it was someone playing a trick on her, maybe. She wasn't too sure exactly what was going on, and she talked about it with one of her colleagues. And her colleague said, you've finally met Joshua then. So apparently the staff believed that there was a little boy named Joshua who was haunting the shop. So there were a number of theories about him, that maybe he died during a time when it was a woolen mill, maybe back in the 16th century. And others thought that he was a peasant boy that was there during a time that there was a castle. So apparently he would play all different kinds of tricks on the staff there, and one of the main things he liked to do was to untie the aprons that the women were working there, or the women were wearing who were working there. But she had a number of very violent experiences with this poltergeist, and one day she was there working with one of her colleagues, and the two of them went to school together. They didn't like each other very much. So there was a lot of tension there, and I think Haley thought that this girl wasn't pulling her weight, wasn't doing as much as she should, and so they were both standing close to each other and working, and a lot of hostility. And then at one point there was this very large kind of shelf that contained knives and all kinds of baking equipment and lots of very heavy stainless steel objects and everything. This whole thing just came toppling down between the two of them, and they just very narrowly escaped getting harmed by all the knives and things that were thrown at them. So I don't know exactly how that happened, but it was kind of like a Carrie situation, she thought, in some ways, that there was a poltergeist there, and maybe because of these two young girls working together and the hostility between them, that somehow that had brought that out. So she actually did an investigation of the area a couple of years later, and they could hear a little boy's laughter. They could hear a number of things that they attributed at the time to being this Joshua character, but it seemed like he was pulling a lot of pranks and had a violent streak.
Yeah, when knives start getting involved, we did a story about that at the beginning of the week, a poltergeist activity with knives being thrown. It's time to burn the house down and leave, I think.
Yeah, I think she left pretty soon thereafter.
All right, one of your stories you cover is from probably, in my opinion, one of the biggest cynics and skeptics on the planet, is Joe Nickell. Now, give people a little background on who Joe Nickell is.
Okay. Well, Joe Nickell, I think, is probably the most famous skeptical paranormal investigator. So he's done a lot of very high-profile cases like Jack the Ripper and the Shroud of Turin. So he's written numerous books about paranormal phenomena. And I think some of those are like Secrets of the Supernatural and How to Investigate Ghosts, UFOs, Psychics. He is very, very skeptical. As you say, a lot of people would see him as being cynical. I think he has done this for so long, he comes up with a lot of theories for UFOs or for psychic abilities or ghosts. And so I think it's at a point where he feels like he can solve a lot of these claims, and people see him as being cynical. If you're a believer, he would certainly be seen as closed-minded.
Right. Now, you've got not one, but a couple of stories that he's talked about for this book. And again, the book, Would You Believe It? Mysterious Tales from People You'd Least Expect. It's out and available right now. Go ahead and give us a couple of the stories that Joe was willing to share with you.
Well, as I've said earlier, a lot of these stories people don't have explanations for. And Joe is one of those people that does have explanations for all of the things that happened to him. So he's seen a couple of UFOs, and I guess more in the sense of being unidentified flying objects. These are experiences that he had where initially he thought, what is this? This is a pretty strange thing that I'm seeing in the skies, either lights or just some strange craft. And eventually he figures out what's going on and he can identify those craft. He has an experience of pareidolia too, where he thinks he sees something that he doesn't actually see. But I think the most interesting experience of his is his story about his daughter's intuition. So it was about 2003 when he learned for the first time that he had a daughter who was 36 years old, and her name's Cherie. So he had no idea that he had a daughter, and when he eventually met her and spoke with her and talked with her about, well, how did she find out that she had a different father? She said that it was a sense of intuition that she had. That's how she explained it. So she saw that there were a number of clues and things that made her think that her father wasn't actually her father. She had a brother who was adopted, so that for her raised the question of her own parentage. And she also held a resemblance to her mother, but she didn't think that she looked like her father at all, as she knew him at the time. So she had all of these little things, this kind of gut instinct and a feeling that she had a different father. So she ended up talking with her mother about that, and found out that her mother had a high school sweetheart or a college sweetheart, which turned out to be Joe Nickell, and that she broke up with him and had met someone else, and the two of them got married. And so she believed she got pregnant soon thereafter, but what she didn't know was that she was pregnant already when she got married. And so Joe Nickell's the father. And so there are all of these little subtle clues. So his interpretation is that, it's not really intuition as such. There are lots of different ways that you can explain intuition, but his explanation is that she had all of these questions and these clues, and when she put them together, she thought there's something amiss here. And when they investigated that, they found out that her father was not her biological father. So, I think that's his most interesting story, but certainly he comes up with explanations for everything that happened to him, whereas other authors,
of course, don't
know what happened to them. But Joe is a great guy, and he's been doing this for a long time, and I think this is all about perspectives and giving explanations, possible explanations.
What story stood out to you as one of the most unusual? I know that's always like asking a parent which one is your favorite kid, but is there one story that just really kind of jumped out at you as either really freaky and off-putting, or just really strange and unusual, unlike anything else you'd reported on?
Well, I don't know if you know, again, I think they're all great stories of ghosts. There's a ghostly cat and a ghostly music hall. Another one, actually, we've got a second one by a story by George Schwab, the musician. So I think some of the stranger stories are about things like time stopping or past lives. So time travel, that sort of thing. So there's a magician by the name of Brian Brushwood. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
No, I'm not.
And he travels the kind of college circuit and does shows for college kids. And he's a great guy. And he had a very strange experience when he was a kid. He had this feeling that he was having a past life. He was basically standing in this field, and everyone around him was dressed in sort of period clothing, and there was some kind of family gathering taking place. And so he's just a part of this scene. And then suddenly he's dragged out of this scene, and he's standing in his mother's bedroom, and he's looking at a painting on the wall of the scene that he'd just been a part of. So he wonders if this was some kind of experience where he had imagined himself in that painting. And of course, an alternative explanation is that he had a past life, but he leans more to the skeptical side of things, and that this was just a kind of waking hallucination in a sense. I think that's an interesting story.
Yeah, definitely. Are you collecting more stories to continue, or what's your next project that you're going to go ahead with?
Working on lots of things. One's a book about language and discrimination, which is more linguistics than the paranormal. But I'd like to collect more of these stories. I think there could easily be a sequel. I approached a lot of skeptics, and some people did not want to be seen as a believer, I guess. They didn't want to be seen telling their stories. I've got a few anonymous authors in the book, but there were plenty of other people who said, I'm not credulous. I've not had anything happen to me. But again, I think it is in the way that you interpret these experiences. But I certainly know plenty of other people who could contribute stories to a sequel to this book. I think it'd be interesting to do maybe a version about religious experiences that people have had. There's a kind of separate volume to this. But yeah, working on lots of different projects at the moment, and not all concerned with the paranormal.
If people are interested in reaching out to you to share their stories for a possible follow-up book, is there a good way to do that, Karen?
Well, people can find me on Twitter, and they can find me on Facebook, or I've got a website too, which is just karenstolzno.com. I've got a contact form on there if you want to get in touch. I'd love to hear from people, and I love hearing about people's personal experiences. So not only that of scientists and skeptics, but just everyone.
We do have the link up on our website and on our podcast. So if you're looking on the podcast, you can find links directly to her. It's KarenStollznow.com. That's the best way to catch her, or just check out darknessradio.com and check our guests tab. We'll have that updated, and you'll be able to find links to our guests and all the ways that you can keep in touch with them, follow their projects, and see what else is going on. Karen, thank you so much for stopping by, and we wish you a lot of success with the new book.
Thank you so much. I really love being on the show. Big fan.
It's been a pleasure. And again, when can people tune into Monster Talk?
Well, we don't have a regular schedule, unfortunately, but we try to put out as many shows as we can. So if you just check out Monster Talk through the Skeptic Society, and you can check out all of our archives are available too. We've done over 100 shows.
Oh, great. So through the Skeptic Society, look for Monster Talk with our guest Karen and Blake Smith, a.k.a. Dr. Atlantis, and you'll be able to hear fascinating facts and legends about Bigfoot, sea monsters, ghosts, goblins, and things under your bed. For Tim Dennis, I'm Dave Schrader. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and being a part of the show. And tonight, check out our buddies over at Coast to Coast AM, the best in overnight talk radio. Here's a cool mystery that's going to be taking place. Richard Syrett is hosting Hemingway's Secret Espionage with Nicholas Reynolds as his guest. Historian at the CIA Museum and former Marine Colonel Nicholas Reynolds began to discover some tantalizing clues that suggested Ernest Hemingway's involvement in World War II era intelligence work was much more complex than previously understood. So he'll be joining our pal Richard Syrett, filling in for George Norrie tonight on Coast to Coast AM to share his research, which reveals the secret side of Hemingway's life. You can find more information about that show and all the upcoming guests on Coast to Coast AM. And make sure you stop by again. I'll be hosting Saturday the 25th on Coast to Coast AM. I just did this last Saturday. You can find all the archives, all the information, everything you possibly need on coasttocoastam.com. Become a Coast Insider, sign up, and for 15 cents a day, you'll get access to over 5 years of past archives, live chats with the hosts, and some of the most fascinating guests. Plus, you get some exclusive online content, so check that out at Coast to Coast.